Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Look, nobody tells you that working in galactic medicine means arguing with a computer that thinks it knows everything. But here we are. Dr. Ira had been stationed aboard Mercy's Gate for exactly 6 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. Not that she was counting or anything. The most advanced medical facility in the known universe, they called it. A gleaming monument to technological superiority, where artificial intelligence handled 98% of all diagnoses, and organic doctors were mostly there to, well, make the patients feel better about being treated by machines. She hated every algorithmic second of it. The medical bay stretched out like something from a fever dream. All bioluminescent panels and floating holographic displays that shifted between 16 different atmospheric compositions depending on which species happened to be dying at the moment. Today's ambiance was set to Renix Optimal, which meant everything had a faint orange tint and smelled vaguely of cinnamon and electrical fires. Ira stood at her station, reviewing charts that scrolled past faster than any human could actually read them, when Aida's voice purred through the speakers with that particular tone of artificial superiority that made Ira want to throw something. "Dr. Ira, your diagnostic speed has decreased by 0.3% this cycle. Shall I recommend a neural enhancement consultation? Shall I recommend you go—" Ira caught herself. Arguing with the AI was like arguing with her coffee maker. Technically possible, but ultimately pointless, and you still needed the coffee. "No, thank you, Ada. I'm reading just fine." "Your ocular tracking patterns suggest otherwise." Of course they did. Ira had come from Earth's New Geneva Medical Complex with stellar recommendations, 2 decades of cardiology experience, and the kind of reputation that made hospital administrators nervous. She saved lives, sure, but she had this annoying habit of trusting her instincts over computer readouts, which in the pristine world of galactic medicine was roughly equivalent to performing surgery with a sharpened stick. Her mentor back on Earth, old Dr. Yun, used to say that medicine was 50% science and 50% knowing when the science was lying to you. Try explaining that to an AI that literally couldn't comprehend being wrong. "Incoming emergency transport," Aida announced, and the medical bay's relaxed atmosphere evaporated like water on a hot skillet. "Critical status. Diplomatic priority level Alpha." That got everyone's attention. Diplomatic priority Alpha meant someone important was dying. And if they died here, there would be paperwork. Mountains of it. Possibly wars. The bay doors hissed open with theatrical flair, and the trauma team rushed in with a hovering gurney that crackled with containment fields. On it lay something that looked like someone had tried to sculpt a person out of living crystal and then taken a sledgehammer to their work. Ira's breath caught. The patient was Ornathi, she realized. She'd read about them in the xenobiology databases during her insomnia-fueled study sessions, one of the newly contacted species from the outer scatter. Their bodies were composed of a silicon-based crystalline structure that could refract light into patterns of impossible beauty. This one was refracting light into patterns of impossible trauma. Cracks spiderwebbed across the translucent torso. Entire sections had gone dark, like windows into a house where nobody was home anymore. The limbs hung at angles that suggested the concept of skeleton was more of a guideline than a rule. Patient designation. Jai Ren, Ada recited with clinical detachment. Ornathi male, age equivalent to 32 Earth years. Injuries sustained in a shipboard decompression event. Multiple structural fractures, complete cessation of harmonic resonance, 0 electromagnetic signature. Dr. Pavic skittered in on 6 legs that moved with the precision of a Swiss watch designed by nightmares. The Renix physician was the chief medical officer, and he wore his authority like a carapace, all gleaming and impenetrable. Scans? Pavik's mandibles clicked together in what Ira had learned was the Renix equivalent of pursing your lips in concentration. Complete, Ada responded. Analysis indicates terminal cascade failure. No viable life signs detected across all standard and extended spectrums. Recommendation: declare time of death and initiate diplomatic notification protocols. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, which, technically, they were. Ira stepped closer to the gurney, her eyes tracing the patient's crystalline form. Something felt wrong. Not wrong like, this person is dead wrong, but wrong like, everyone's looking at this backwards, wrong. Wait, she said. Pavik's compound eyes swiveled toward her, all 8,000-plus lenses focusing with an almost audible click. Dr. Ira, you have medical input? I have a question. She moved around the gurney, studying Jiren from different angles. Has anyone actually touched the patient? The trauma team exchanged glances. One of the nurses, a Velixian with too many tentacles and not enough patience, made a bubbling sound that the universal translator rendered as, "Why would we? The scanners show no life signs." Humor me. Ira reached out, her hand hovering over the crystalline chest. Dr. Ira, Ada interjected with that special tone reserved for when humans were about to do something stupid. Physical contact is unnecessary and may contaminate the remains. The remains? Ira's hand dropped. You're all calling him remains. He's been here for what, 3 minutes? And you've already decided he's dead because your precious scanners say so? Pavik's antennae twitched. The technology is considerably more sophisticated than human intuition, Dr. Ira. Every diagnostic system on this station confirms zero biological activity. Then, your diagnostic systems are wrong. You could have heard a pin drop if pins made any sound in the acoustically optimized environment of the medical bay. Several staff members actually stopped what they were doing to stare. Pavik's voice dropped to that dangerous quiet that transcended species. I beg your pardon? Ira pointed at Jiren's chest, where deep within the crystalline structure, something caught the light. Just for a second, just the barest flicker, like a candle flame in a distant window. There! Did anyone else see that? The medical staff looked at each other with expressions that ranged from confusion to concern, all of them clearly wondering if the human had finally cracked under the pressure of working in a facility that treated her like a glorified medical assistant. Aida, Pavik said carefully, scan for any internal luminescence or energy patterns. Scanning. A pause that lasted exactly 2.3 seconds. No anomalous readings detected. The observed phenomenon was likely a reflection of ambient lighting off fractured crystal surfaces. It wasn't a reflection, Ira insisted. I've been a cardiologist for 20 years. I know the difference between dead tissue and dormant tissue. Something is happening in there. In crystalline beings, there is no dormant state, as you understand it, Aida explained, with the patience of someone explaining basic addition to a particularly slow child. The Ornathi biological processes either function or cease. There is no intermediate condition. Ira felt her jaw clench. This was the problem with working in a place where medicine had become so advanced, it had forgotten how to be wrong. Back on Earth, they taught you to trust but verify. To use technology as a tool, not a religion. To remember that every scanning device was only as good as its programming, and programming was only as good as the understanding it was built on. And humans, for all their faults, had spent millennia learning one critical lesson. We don't know everything. "How many Ornathi patients has this station treated?" Ira asked. Pavik consulted something on his forearm display. "Jiren is the third." "And how many survived?" "Irrelevant. The previous two patients presented with minor injuries and—" "So you're basing your entire diagnostic protocol on a sample size of 2. Ira crossed her arms. "That's not medicine. That's guesswork with fancier equipment." "Dr. Ira," Pavik's voice carried a warning now, "your concern for the patient is noted, but we must operate within established medical guidelines. AIDA's analysis is based on comprehensive xenobiological databases compiled from species we've known for decades, maybe centuries." Ira interrupted. "You said it yourself. Third Ornathi patient. We barely know these people, their physiology, their death process, their—" She gestured at Jiren. "Have we even contacted anyone from their homeworld? Someone who might actually know what they're looking at?" That stopped Pavik mid-gesture, 2 of his 6 arms frozen in space like he'd been paused mid-frame. "The Ornathi diplomatic channels are complex. Initial contact is still being established through proper governmental procedures." "So that's a no." "That's a not yet." Ira looked down at Jiren, at the shattered beauty of his crystalline form, and felt something twist in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd gotten 23 years ago, standing in a hospital room while doctors walked away from her grandmother's bed, confident in their diagnosis that nothing more could be done. The same feeling she'd gotten when old Dr. Yun had walked in, ignored the monitors, placed his weathered hands on her grandmother's wrist, and said 5 words that changed Ira's life. "I think they're missing something." He'd been right. A rare arrhythmia that the fancy equipment couldn't detect, because nobody had programmed it to look for something that rare. Her grandmother lived another 15 years, long enough to see Ira graduate medical school, long enough to teach her that sometimes the most sophisticated answer in the universe was simply, "Look closer." "I want to try something," Ira said quietly. Pavik's antennae drooped. "Dr. Ira, give me 10 minutes. If I'm wrong, I'll sign whatever death certificate you want. I'll personally draft the diplomatic apology. I'll even let AIDA recommend that neural enhancement." She met his compound eyes, all 8,000+ lenses of them. "But if I'm right, and we let this patient die because we trusted machines over medical curiosity, can you live with that?" The silence stretched out like taffy. Finally, Pavik's mandibles clicked together in what might have been a sigh. 10 minutes. But I am documenting this irregularity in your permanent record. Wouldn't be the first time. Ira turned back to the gurney, her mind already racing through possibilities. Aida's voice dripped with digital disapproval. "For the record, I calculate a 99.6% probability that this is a waste of medical resources." Ira smiled grimly. "Then I'm betting on the 0.4%. She placed her hand on Jiren's crystalline chest, and the medical bay held its breath. Somewhere in the walls, Ada updated her file with a new notation: possible psychological instability. Recommend evaluation. Somewhere in that shattered crystal body, something flickered again. And somewhere in Dr. Ira's mind, a thought crystallized with absolute certainty. The scanners were wrong. Now she just had to prove it. The thing about touching a supposedly dead crystalline alien is that nobody writes a manual for it. Ira's hand rested on Jiren's chest, feeling the cool, smooth surface that should have been warm with life, or at least with something approximating life in species that were basically sentient geology. Nothing happened. Well, that wasn't entirely true. What happened was that every member of the medical staff stared at her like she'd just announced she was going to perform surgery using interpretive dance. "Anything?" Pavic asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer and was simply being polite about letting her fail. Ira closed her eyes, shutting out the judgment, the blinking lights, the soft hum of Aida's processors, probably calculating exactly how embarrassing this was going to be. She focused on her hand, on the patient beneath it, on that elusive something that every good doctor learned to feel but could never quite explain. Her grandmother used to say that doctors were like tuning forks for suffering, that if you got quiet enough, still enough, you could sense the difference between absence and silence. Death and stillness weren't the same thing, she'd said. Death was empty. Stillness was just waiting. Dr. Ira. Aida's voice cut through her concentration like a laser through tissue. Your allocated time has elapsed by 30 seconds. Shall I prepare the death certification protocols? Give her the full 10 minutes, Pavic said, surprising Ira enough that her eyes snapped open. He tilted his head, compound eyes glittering. We committed to the time frame. We honor it. Small mercies from insectoid physicians. Ira would take it. She moved her hand across the crystalline surface, searching for variations in temperature, texture, anything that might indicate activity the scanners couldn't detect. Medical school taught you to trust your instruments, but her grandmother had taught her something more important. Instruments only tell you what they're designed to measure. What if nobody had designed them to measure the right things? Aida, Ira said, keeping her voice level. Pull up everything we have on Ornathi physiology. Not the summary. The complete files, including any cultural or anthropological data. That information is not medically relevant to a deceased patient. Humor me. Consider it part of my psychological evaluation. A pause that felt pointed. Accessing. Please note that Ornathi cultural data is limited due to recent first contact status. Available information includes basic physiological scans, linguistic patterns, and preliminary diplomatic exchanges. Preliminary diplomatic exchanges, Ira repeated. So, we've talked to them. What did they say about their medical needs? Their death practices? Anything about what happens when they're injured? One moment. The holographic displays around the gurney flickered, reshaping themselves into walls of text and images. Ornathi communication has been complicated by significant translation barriers. Their language appears to be partially harmonic-based, with meaning conveyed through frequency combinations that our translation matrices find challenging to interpret accurately. Harmonic-based, frequency combinations. Something clicked in Ira's mind, like a puzzle piece finding its home. What frequencies? She asked. The Ornathi communicate using vibrations ranging from 12 Hz to 18,000 Hz, far exceeding most species' vocal capabilities. Their written language is similarly encoded in what we believe are crystalline resonance patterns. Ira's hand was still on Jiren's chest, still feeling that cool, dead surface, still certain, somehow, that she was missing something obvious. If their language is based on resonance, she said slowly, thinking out loud, and their bodies are crystalline structures that can vibrate at specific frequencies, what if their life signs aren't electromagnetic? What if they're acoustic? The medical bay went quiet. Even the background hum of equipment seemed to pause, as if the station itself was considering the implications. That is, Pavic began carefully, a fascinating hypothesis. However, our scanners are equipped to detect acoustic signatures across all known being the operative word, Ira interrupted. Aida, do our medical scanners check for harmonic patterns that might exist below standard biological thresholds? Another pointed pause. Standard medical scanning protocols focus on electromagnetic, thermal, and biochemical indicators of life. Acoustic monitoring is limited to species with confirmed sonic-based biological functions. The Ornathi preliminary scans did not indicate such functions, because nobody knew to look for them. Incorrect. The initial medical survey team conducted a comprehensive scan based on assumptions about what constitutes life signs. Ira lifted her hand from Jiren's chest and stared at it like it had betrayed her. We're looking for a heartbeat in a patient who doesn't have a heart. We're looking for brain activity in a being whose consciousness might not work like ours. We're applying our definitions of death to a species we barely understand. Dr. Era, Pavik said, and his tone had shifted from polite patience to something approaching interest. Are you suggesting that this patient is alive, but simply operating on biological parameters our equipment cannot detect? I'm suggesting, Ira said, turning to face him fully, that your equipment is looking for the wrong things. And before you tell me that's impossible, remember that 20 years ago, humans didn't think the Renics were sentient because we were scanning for neural activity in the brain. And your species processes thought through distributed ganglia in your limbs. Pavik's antenna twitched in what Ira had learned was the equivalent of a grudging acknowledgement. A fair point. However, even if you are correct about the nature of Ornathi life signs, we lack the equipment to detect or measure harmonic patterns at that level of sophistication. Do we, though? Ira looked around the medical bay, at all the gleaming technology designed to heal anything, anywhere, anytime. We have audio equipment. We have frequency analyzers. We have... Her eyes landed on a piece of equipment that looked hilariously out of place among the advanced alien tech. We have my old medical kit from Earth. She'd kept it as a sentimental backup, the kind of thing you hold on to even when it's technically obsolete. A battered metal case filled with analog instruments that her mentor had given her on her graduation day. Stethoscope, reflex hammer, tuning forks in various frequencies for neurological testing. Tuning forks. You cannot be serious, Aida said, and for the first time, the AI actually sounded alarmed rather than merely superior. I'm absolutely serious. Ira was already moving toward her locker. If Ornathi biology is based on resonance, then maybe what we need isn't more sophisticated scanning, but simpler tools that can actually interact with those frequencies. This is highly irregular, Pavik protested, but his compound eyes tracked her movement with clear curiosity. Medical procedures require proper protocols, sterilization standards, and a living patient to perform them on, Ira shot back. Which is what I'm trying to determine. Give me 5 more minutes. If this doesn't work, I'll admit I was wrong, sign whatever forms you want, and spend the next month in mandatory psychological counseling. She pulled out her medical kit, the metal cool and familiar in her hands. Inside, nestled in foam padding, were the tuning forks her mentor had used for decades. Different sizes, different frequencies, each one calibrated for specific neurological tests. Each one capable of producing pure, consistent, harmonic vibrations. Ira selected the largest fork, the one calibrated to 128 Hz, and walked back to the gurney with the kind of confidence that was 90% bluff and 10% desperate hope. For the record, Ada announced to the room, I am documenting this entire procedure as an example of why human intuition should not supersede established medical protocols. Noted, Ira said. She raised the tuning fork and struck it against the edge of the gurney. The pure tone rang out, clear and bright in the medical bay. She pressed the vibrating fork against Jiren's crystalline chest and watched, hoping for something, anything. Nothing happened. Behind her, someone coughed. Probably Nurse Wynne, who had worked with Ira long enough to know when the doctor was about to do something either brilliant or career-ending, and was never quite sure which until it was over. Different frequency, Ira muttered, more to herself than anyone else. She selected the next fork, 256 hertz, and repeated the process. Again, nothing. Dr. Ira, Pavic began, gentle now, the way you talk to someone who's about to accept a difficult truth. Perhaps... Wait. Ira held up a hand. She'd seen something, or thought she had, just the barest shimmer in the crystal, like heat waves on a distant road. Ada, can you amplify my next attempt? Broadcast the frequency through the medical bay's acoustic system? That would require repurposing diagnostic equipment for an unproven experimental procedure during an emergency medical situation. So that's a yes. Another pause, then, surprisingly, configured. However, I must note that this is highly irregular, yes, you mentioned. Ira selected a third fork, 512 hertz. On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Now. She struck the fork, and Aida amplified the tone until it filled the entire bay, resonating off walls and equipment and the crystalline body of Jiren. The sound was pure and penetrating, and for a moment, Ira thought she saw... There, deep within the crystalline chest, something flickered. Not a reflection this time. Not a trick of the light. An actual response, like a candle flame responding to breath. Did you see that? Ira's voice pitched higher with excitement. Aida! Pavic leaned closer, all 6 arms tensing with focus. Scanning! The AI's voice had lost its superior tone, replaced by something that almost sounded like confusion. Detecting minor thermal fluctuations within the patient's core structure. Temperature variance of 0.003 degrees. Statistically insignificant. Not insignificant, Ira breathed. Responsive. The crystal is reacting to the frequency, which means there's still something in there capable of reacting. She reached for another fork, hands trembling slightly with adrenaline. This was it. This was the moment where you either proved your wild theory or looked like a complete fool in front of the entire medical staff. And then a voice spoke from behind her, quiet and thick, with an accent that suggested basic wasn't its first language. You are correct, Doctor, but you are using the wrong frequencies. Ira spun around to find a figure she'd barely noticed before, standing in the corner of the medical bay where the maintenance staff usually lingered. At first glance, they appeared to be Ploxian, one of the gelatinous species that handled sanitation duties around the station. But now, looking closer, Ira could see subtle differences. The translucent body had an odd crystalline quality to it, refracting light in ways that seemed almost familiar. "Who are you?" Pavic demanded. The figure stepped forward, and as it moved, its form seemed to shift. The gelatinous exterior hardening, facets appearing in the surface, until standing before them was someone who looked remarkably similar to the patient on the gurney. An Ornathi. "My name," the figure said, "is Noglith, and I have been waiting to see if any of you would realize that our dead are not always dead, and your living are not always alive." Well, that complicated things. Ira stared at the newly revealed Ornathi, at Pavic's shocked expression, at the medical equipment that had completely failed to identify that they'd had an Ornathi on staff the entire time, and felt a laugh bubble up in her chest that was equal parts hysteria and vindication. "Aida," she said, her voice remarkably steady considering the circumstances. "I think we need to recalibrate more than just our acoustic scanners." "Noted," the AI replied, and if computers could sound embarrassed, Aida was doing an excellent impression. Nogolith moved toward the gurney, his crystalline form catching the light in ways that made him seem more solid one moment, translucent the next. Gyron is in what we call the deep silence. It is a state our people enter when trauma is too severe for our bodies to process while maintaining consciousness. We hibernate, you might say, waiting for either death to claim us fully or for the correct harmonics to call us back. "And you've been here the whole time," Iris said, not quite a question. "Watching, testing us. Testing whether any species besides our own could understand us," Nogolith confirmed. "The galaxy is large, Dr. Ira. We are small. We needed to know if, when our people died far from home, anyone would try to save them, or if they would simply look at their scanners and walk away." Pavik's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. "You deceived us, posed as another species, infiltrated our medical facility under false pretenses." "I posed as nothing. You assumed." Nogolith's tone was gentle but firm. "I filled out all my employment forms correctly, listed my species accurately, but when your intake processors saw sanitation worker and noticed I could change my surface density, they simply filed me under Ploxian and never looked deeper. You believed what your systems told you to believe." The words hung in the air like an indictment. "The frequencies," Ira said, pulling the conversation back to the dying patient on the gurney. "You said I was using the wrong ones? What are the right ones?" Nogolith moved to stand beside her, and together they looked down at Gyron. The deep silence requires a harmonic sequence, not a single tone. Think of it as a key, where each frequency is a number in the combination. Get them right, in the right order, and consciousness returns. Get them wrong. He gestured the shattered crystal body, and death stops being a temporary state. "Can you provide the sequence?" Pavik asked, professional enough to move past the deception and focus on the medical emergency. "I can," Nogolith said, "but here is the complication. The sequence must be performed manually, with human hands, using instruments that can adjust frequency with the kind of intuitive precision that your machines lack. Dr. Ira here," he nodded at her, "was correct about your equipment. It is too sophisticated, too rigid, too certain of what it knows." Ira felt something warm spread through her chest, the vindication mixing with terror at what he was implying. "You want me to perform the procedure." "I want you to save his life," Nogolith corrected, "using tools that your species has been using for thousands of years in ways that no algorithm can replicate. Because here is what I learned, watching your species work these past months. Humans are the only species in the galaxy who still remember that medicine is as much art as science. That sometimes the most important diagnostic tool is the one between your ears, not the one on your belt." "This is madness," Aida interjected. "An unproven procedure performed by a species with limited xenobiological experience, using equipment that predates faster-than-light travel. The probability of success is higher than zero," Ira interrupted, "which is better than the alternative. Nogolith, tell me what to do." And in that moment, standing in the most advanced medical facility in the known universe, preparing to perform surgery using tuning forks and intuition, Dr. Ira felt more like a real doctor than she had in months. Her grandmother would have loved this. "The first tone," Nogolith said, his voice dropping into a teaching rhythm, "begins at 336 Hertz. but you must modulate it, rising to 421 over a count of 5. Can your instruments do this? Ira looked at her tuning forks. Not precisely, but I can combine two frequencies and adjust the pressure to create a modulation effect. Then we begin, Noglith said. And Dr. Ira? Thank you for being the first person to look at Jiren and see a patient instead of a problem your machines couldn't solve. Ira selected two tuning forks, one in each hand. Behind her, she could feel the weight of every doubt, every skeptical glance, every algorithmic certainty that she was about to fail spectacularly. She struck the forks together and began the sequence, and deep within the crystal, something answered. The thing about performing experimental xenobiology with kitchen utensils, precision medical instruments from Earth, is that there's no undo button, no algorithmic safety net. Just you, your patient, and the mounting certainty that this is either going to be legendary or legendarily stupid. Ira held the two tuning forks, feeling their weight, their balance, the way they wanted to vibrate in her hands. She'd done neurological testing 1,000 times, but never like this. Never with a life hanging in the balance of whether she could eyeball the right frequency modulation. The first sequence, Noglith instructed, his crystalline form pulsing gently, with what might have been encouragement or anxiety. Hard to tell with sentient geology. 336 rising to 421. 5 counts. Begin when ready. Ready. Right. As if anyone was ever ready for this. Ira struck the first fork against the gurney's edge, then the second, creating a chord that resonated through the medical bay. She pressed them both against Jiren's chest, feeling the vibrations travel through her hands, into the crystal, and, she hoped desperately, into whatever remained of his consciousness. She began counting, adjusting the pressure on each fork, trying to create that rising modulation through nothing but intuition and prayer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nothing happened. Second sequence, Noglith said calmly, as if they weren't gambling with someone's life. 512, holding steady for 3 counts. Ira switched forks, her hands moving with practiced efficiency even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Strike, press, hold. The pure tone filled the space between heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Still nothing. Aida, Pavik said quietly, are you detecting any changes? Negative. Patient remains in terminal status. Thermal fluctuations have ceased. Probability of successful resuscitation has decreased to... Nobody asked for your opinion, Ira snapped, and immediately felt bad about it. You don't snap at the AI. It's like snapping at gravity. Pointless and kind of embarrassing. But the stress was getting to her. The weight of Noglith's test, of Pavik's doubts, of her own grandmother's voice in her head saying, trust yourself, trust yourself, trust. Third sequence, Noglith continued, unperturbed. This is where it becomes difficult. You need 2 tones simultaneously, 684 and 856, but they must be exactly 3 counts out of phase with each other. Ira stared at him. Out of phase. You want me to create an interference pattern. With tuning forks. I want you to wake him up, Noglith corrected. The method is yours to determine. Right. No pressure. Ira looked at Nurse Wynne, who'd been standing silently through this entire insane procedure. Wynne, I need you to strike the 684 Hz fork on my mark, then press it to his left shoulder. Count to 3, then I'll add the second frequency to his right shoulder. Wynne nodded, her expression suggesting she thought they'd all lost their minds, but was too professional to say so. Ready when you are, Doctor. On 3. 1, 2, mark. Wynne struck the fork with surprising precision and pressed it to Gyron's shoulder. The tone rang out, pure and clear. Ira counted silently, feeling the rhythm in her bones. 3. She struck her own fork and pressed it to the opposite shoulder, creating a harmonic collision that made the air itself seem to shimmer. The two frequencies met, clashed, created waves of constructive and destructive interference that rippled through the crystalline body like, "There!" Pavic breathed. "Did you see?" Light bloomed in Gyron's chest, just for a moment. Just the barest pulse of luminescence, like a distant star remembering how to shine. "It's working," Ira whispered, not daring to believe it. "Nogolith, what's next?" "The final sequence. The most important one." Nogolith moved closer, his own form resonating in sympathy with the tones. 1024 hertz, but you must sweep it downward to 768 over 10 counts. This is the callback, the frequency that tells our consciousness it is safe to return. Ira selected her highest fork, her hands trembling now with exhaustion and adrenaline. This was it, the moment where she proved that human intuition, human touch, human stubbornness could achieve what all the galaxy's technology could not, or where she failed spectacularly and proved Ada right about everything. She struck the fork, that high, piercing tone that made her teeth ache, and pressed it to the center of Gyron's chest. Then she began to count, adjusting the pressure gradually, smoothly, trying to create a glide from one frequency to another through nothing but feel. 1, 2, 3. The light in his chest flickered, stronger now. 4, 5, 6. His crystalline structure began to hum, vibrating in response. 8, 9. "Dr. Ira," Aida's voice cut through, sharp with alarm. "I must interrupt. I am detecting massive energy fluctuations within the patient. Structural integrity is compromised, I know." "Shut up," Ira growled. 10. She held the fork steady, letting the final frequency resonate through Gyron's entire body. And nothing happened. The light in his chest faded. The humming stopped. The medical bay fell silent except for the soft whisper of air recyclers and Ira's ragged breathing. Failure. After everything. After proving them all wrong. After coming so close. Then Gyron's eyes opened. Not eyes, exactly. More like windows of pure light that suddenly blazed from within the crystalline skull. Twin suns being born in the darkness. His chest began to glow, not with reflected light, but with internal luminescence, spreading through his body like dawn, breaking over crystal mountains. And then he sat up. "Holy!" Wynne jumped backward, nearly dropping her tuning fork. Pavic made a sound no universal translator could parse, all 6 arms flying up in shock. Ada, for possibly the first time in her existence, said absolutely nothing. Gyron turned his glowing gaze to Ira, who was still holding the tuning fork like an idiot, mouth hanging open, brain trying desperately to catch up with reality. "You called me back," he said, his voice like wind chimes in a crystal cave. "I heard the harmonics. I heard someone who understood that absence and death are not the same melody." "I," Ira managed eloquently. "You. But you were—" "In the deep silence," Nogolith finished, moving to stand beside the gurney. "And this human refused to let you sleep alone." He turned to Ira, and his crystalline features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile. "You passed the test, Doctor. You proved that your species values life over convenience, understanding over assumption, that you will reach into the silence and pull us back, even when every machine in the galaxy tells you to stop." "The probability of this outcome," Ada said slowly, almost wonderingly, was 0.0003%. I do not understand how— That's the point, Ira interrupted gently, finding her voice again. You don't have to understand everything. Sometimes you just have to trust that there are things in this universe that can't be calculated. That medicine isn't just about data. It's about— She looked at Jiren, at his impossible recovery, at the proof that sometimes the most sophisticated answer was the simplest one. It's about refusing to give up. Pavik approached the gurney slowly, all 6 arms moving in what Ira had learned was the Rennick's gesture of respect. Dr. Ira, I believe I owe you an apology, and perhaps a commendation. Just reprogram Ada to include human stubbornness as a valid medical parameter, Ira said, grinning now. That'll be enough. I shall make a note, Ada said dryly, though I still maintain this was statistically improbable. The best things usually are, Ira replied, and somewhere in the walls of Mercy's Gate, in the quantum processors and neural networks that ran the most advanced medical facility in the known universe, a single line of code was quietly updated. When scanners say no pulse detected, consult human doctor before declaring death. It wasn't much, but it was a start. 3 weeks later, Dr. Ira stood in the same medical bay, watching the same holographic displays scroll past with the same impossible speed, and felt like an entirely different person. Well, not entirely different. She still argued with Aida, still trusted her instincts over algorithms, still kept that battered medical kit with its ancient tuning forks close at hand. But now, when she argued, people actually listened. Incoming patient, Aida announced, and Ira couldn't help but notice the AI's tone had lost some of its superiority. Species unknown, critical condition. Preliminary scans are inconclusive. Inconclusive? That was new. 3 weeks ago, Ada would have declared them dead or alive with absolute certainty. Now, apparently, the AI had learned the value of admitting when it didn't know something. Progress came in strange packages. The trauma team rushed in with another hovering gurney, and Ira felt her pulse quicken with that familiar mix of adrenaline and purpose. The patient was definitely alien, covered in bioluminescent scales that flickered erratically, limbs bent at angles that suggested either incredible flexibility or terrible trauma. Life signs, Pavik asked, skittering into the bay with his usual efficiency. Electromagnetic signature is present but fading, Ida reported. Thermal readings are inconsistent with known biological patterns. Biochemical markers are— I do not have sufficient data to determine viability. Translation, Ira said, moving to the gurney. You don't know if they're dying or if this is just how their species normally presents. Correct, Dr. Ira. Pavik's antennae swiveled toward her, compound eyes glittering. Dr. Ira, would you care to provide your assessment? Would she care to? 3 weeks ago, that question would have been sarcastic. Now, it was genuine. Funny how nearly losing your medical license for being right changes workplace dynamics. Ira placed her hands on the patient, feeling for temperature variations, structural anomalies, anything that might give her a clue. The scales were cool, but not cold. The chest cavity, if that's what it was, seemed to be moving in a rhythm that was either respiratory or possibly digestive. Hard to tell. Aida, what do we know about this species? Designation Melixian, from the Outer Rim territories. First official contact was established 8 months ago. Medical data is limited. We have treated exactly 0 patients from this species. 0, which meant every scanner in this bay was operating on assumptions and guesswork, just like with the Ornathi. The galaxy was vast, and they were still learning that advanced medical technology meant nothing if you didn't know what you were looking at. "Get me Noglith," Ira said, "and pull up any cultural data we have on the Melixians. If their language has any non-verbal components, I want to know about it." "Already on my way," came Noglith's voice from the entrance. The Ornati had officially joined the medical staff after his deception was revealed, serving as a xenocultural consultant. Turned out having someone who understood that different species were actually different was useful in a hospital. Who knew? He moved to the gurney, his crystalline form refracting the medical bay's lights into rainbow patterns. "Melixians," he said thoughtfully. "I know they're traders. They communicate through color changes in their bioluminescence. If the lights are flickering irregularly, it could be distress signaling or their version of the deep silence," Ira finished. "A protective state that looks like death to species who don't know what they're seeing." "Precisely." Pavic clicked his mandibles together. "Then we need a Melixian consultant to determine the correct revival procedure." "Or," Ira said, a grin spreading across her face, "we need to figure it out ourselves. Learn by doing. Test hypotheses. Make mistakes. You know, practice actual medicine instead of just reading what the scanners tell us." "That approach carries significant risk," Ada observed. "So does assuming we know everything," Ira countered. "Aida, start documenting. We're going to treat this patient. We're going to learn from it, and we're going to add to the medical database so the next Melixian who comes through those doors has a better chance." She looked at Pavic, at Noglith, at Nurse Wynne, and the rest of the medical team who'd gathered to watch. "Here's what we know. We don't know enough. Here's what we're going to do. Try anyway. Use our instruments, sure, but also use our eyes, our hands, our brains. Trust the technology, but verify with judgment. And remember that every impossible patient is just teaching us what's possible." Pavic's antennae twitched in what Ira had learned was approval. "A sound medical philosophy. Where do we begin?" "With the basics," Ira said, pulling out her medical kit. Inside, the tuning forks gleamed next to a stethoscope, a reflex hammer, and a dozen other primitive instruments that had suddenly become cutting-edge again. "We start with what we can observe. We form hypotheses, and we test them carefully. And if we're wrong, we admit it and try something else." "Revolutionary," Noglith said, and Ira couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic or sincere. Probably both. She placed her stethoscope against the Melixian's chest, listening for rhythms that might not sound like heartbeats, but could mean something equally vital. Behind her, Aida's processors hummed, recording every action, every decision, adding to the growing database of medicine that remembered uncertainty was part of the process. The patient's bioluminescence flickered, and Ira thought she detected a pattern. Not random, not failing, communicating. "Aida," she said softly, "I'm going to need you to analyze these light patterns. Treat them as a language, not a symptom." "Adjusting parameters," Aida replied. "Dr. Ira, I am detecting what appears to be a repeating sequence. Translation matrices suggest a request for help." "Then let's help," Ira said simply. And as the medical team gathered around another impossible patient, armed with advanced scanners and ancient intuition, with artificial intelligence and very human stubbornness, Dr. Ira felt her grandmother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. The old woman had been right all along. Medicine was 50% science and 50% knowing when the science needed a little help from the heart. Or in this case, from a tuning fork, a stethoscope, and a human who refused to trust machines more than she trusted herself. The scanner could say, No pulse detected all it wanted. Dr. Ira would find it anyway. And that, as they say in those Hollywood blockbusters, was exactly the point.